Part 1, Chapter 1 of Sons and Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. Sons and Lovers by D.H. Lawrence. Part 1, Chapter 1, The Early Married Life of the Morels. The Bottoms succeeded to Hell Row. Hell Row was a block of thatched, bulging cottages that stood by the brookside on Greenhill Lane. There lived the colliers who worked in the little gin pits 2 fields away. The brook ran under the alder trees, scarcely soiled by these small mines, whose coal was drawn to the surface by donkeys that plodded wearily in a circle round a gin. And all over the countryside were these same pits, some of which had been worked in the time of Charles II, the few colliers and the donkeys burrowing down like ants into the earth, making queer mounds and little black places among the cornfields and the meadows. And the cottages of these coal miners, in blocks and pairs here and there, together with odd farms and homes of the stockingers straying over the parish, formed the village of Bestwood. Then, some 60 years ago, a sudden change took place. The gin pits were elbowed aside by the large mines of the financiers. The coal and iron field of Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire was discovered. Carston, Waite & Company appeared. Amid tremendous excitement, Lord Palmerston formally opened the company's first mine at Spinney Park, on the edge of Sherwood Forest. About this time the notorious Hell Row, which through growing old had acquired an evil reputation, was burned down, and much dirt was cleansed away. Carston, Waite & Company found they had struck on a good thing, so, down the valleys of the brooks from Selby and Nuttall, new mines were sunk, until soon there were 6 pits working. From Nuttall, high up on the sandstone among the woods, the railway ran, past the ruined priory of the Carthusians, and past Robin Hood's Well, down to Spinney Park, then on to Minton, a large mine among cornfields. From Minton, across the farmlands of the valley side to Bunker's Hill, branching off there and running north to Beggarly and Selby, that looks over at Critch and the hills of Derbyshire. 6 mines like black studs on the countryside, linked by a loop of fine chain, the railway. To accommodate the regiments of miners, Carston, Waite & Company built the squares, great quadrangles of dwellings on the hillside of Bestwood, and then, in the brook valley, on the side of Hell Row, they erected the Bottoms. The Bottoms consisted of 6 blocks of miners' dwellings, 2 rows of 3, like the dots on a blank 6 domino, and 12 houses in a block. This double row of dwellings sat at the foot of the rather sharp slope from Bestwood, and looked out, from the attic windows at least, on the slow climb of the valley towards Selby. The houses themselves were substantial and very decent. One could walk all round, seeing little front gardens with auriculas and saxifrage in the shadow of the bottom block, sweet williams and pinks in the sunny top block, seeing neat front windows, little porches, little privet hedges, and dormer windows for the attics. But that was outside. That was the view on to the uninhabited parlours of all the colliers' wives. The dwelling-room, the kitchen, was at the back of the house, facing inward between the blocks, looking at a scrubby back garden, and then at the ash-pits. And between the rows, between the long lines of ash-pits, went the alley, where the children played and the women gossiped and the men smoked. So the actual conditions of living in the Bottoms, that was so well built and that looked so nice, were quite unsavoury, because people must live in the kitchen, and the kitchens open on to that nasty alley of ash-pits. Mrs. Morel was not anxious to move into the Bottoms, which was already 12 years old and on the downward path, when she descended to it from Bestwood. But it was the best she could do. Moreover, she had an end-house in one of the top blocks, and thus had only one neighbour. On the other side, an extra strip of garden. And, having an end-house, She enjoyed a kind of aristocracy among the other women of the between houses, because her rent was 5 shillings and 6pence instead of 5 shillings a week. But this superiority in station was not much consolation to Mrs. Morel. She was 31 years old, and had been married 8 years. A rather small woman, of delicate mould but resolute bearing, she shrank a little from the first contact with the Bottoms women. She came down in the July, and in the September expected her third baby. Her husband was a miner. They had only been in their new home 3 weeks when the wakes, or fair, began. Morel, she knew, was sure to make a holiday of it. He went off early on the Monday morning, the day of the fair. The 2 children were highly excited. William, a boy of 7, fled off immediately after breakfast to prowl round the wakes ground, leaving Annie, who was only 5, to whine all morning to go also. Mrs. Morel did her work. She scarcely knew her neighbours yet, and knew no one with whom to trust the little girl. So she promised to take her to the wakes after dinner. William appeared at 12:30. He was a very active lad, fair-haired, freckled, with a touch of the Dane or Norwegian about him. "Can I have my dinner, mother?" he cried, rushing in with his cap on. "'Cause it begins at 1:30. The men says so." "You can have your dinner as soon as it's done," replied the mother. "Isn't it done?" he cried, his blue eyes staring at her in indignation. "Then I'm going be out it." "You'll do nothing of the sort. It will be done in 5 minutes. It is only 12:30. "They'll be beginning," the boy half cried, half shouted. "You won't die if they do," said the mother. "Besides, it's only 12:30, and you've a full hour." The lad began hastily to lay the table, and directly the 3 sat down. They were eating batter pudding and jam, when the boy jumped off his chair and stood perfectly still. Some distance away could be heard the first small braying of a merry-go-round and the tooting of a horn. His face quivered as he looked at his mother. "I told you!" he said, running to the dresser for his cap. "Take your pudding in your hand, and it's only 1:05, so you were wrong. You haven't got your 2pence," cried the mother in a breath. The boy came back, bitterly disappointed, for his 2pence, then went off without a word. "I want to go," said Annie, beginning to cry. "Well, and you shall go, whining, wizening little stick," said the mother. And later in the afternoon she trudged up the hill under the tall hedge with her child. The hay was gathered from the fields, and cattle were turned on to the eddish. It was warm, peaceful. Mrs. Morel did not like the wakes. There were 2 sets of horses, one going by steam, one pulled round by a pony. 3 organs were grinding, and there came odd cracks of pistol shots, fearful screeching of the cocoanut man's rattle, shouts of the Aunt Sally man, screeches from the peep-show lady. The mother perceived her son gazing enraptured outside the Lion Wallace booth, at the pictures of this famous lion that had killed a negro and maimed for life 2 white men. She left him alone, and went to get Annie a spin of toffee. Presently the lad stood in front of her, wildly excited. "You never said you was coming. Isn't there a lot of things? That lion's killed 3 men. I've spent my 2pence, and look here." He pulled from his pocket 2 egg cups, with pink moss roses on them. "I got these from that stall where you have to get the marbles in them holes, and I got these 2 in 2 goes. Halfpenny a go. They got moss roses on. Look here. I wanted these." She knew he wanted them for her. She said, pleased. "They are pretty." "Shall you carry 'em? 'Cause I'm frightened of breaking 'em." He was tip-full of excitement now she had come, led her about the ground, showed her everything. Then, at the peep-show, she explained the pictures, in a sort of story, to which he listened as if spellbound. He would not leave her. All the time he stuck close to her, bristling with a small boy's pride of her. For no other woman looked like such a lady as she did, in her little black bonnet and her cloak. She smiled when she saw women she knew. When she was tired, she said to her son,